the third Brahmaputra Literary Festival Guwahati 2019. Thank you each and everyone for being here today with us. We are pleased to be able to welcome all of you, especially our distinguished personality from round the corner. The second session of the third Brahmaputra Literary Festival is about mythology revisited. Myths and legends are integral part of human existence. We all have grown up listening to mythological stories from our grandparents. And today, with us, we have two unparalleled writers who will be talking and enlightening us about the topic, mythology revisited. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speaker, Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome her once again on the dais. Please give her a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. We have another eminent speaker, Malal Chatterjee. Though this authors need no introduction, but as part of my job, I would take this opportunity to introduce them to the audience. Malal Chatterjee has been an ardent reader of mythological stories, especially the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, right from his childhood. He found inspiration from these stories at crucial turns of his life and felt enraged. Yudhishthir, the Unfallen Pandava, published by Readomania, is his debut novel. Meenakshi Reddy Madhavan, she's a blogger and a writer. She writes under the pseudonym On the Compulsive Confessor. After the panel's discussion is over, we will begin the question-answer round. I would like to request Meenakshi Reddy ma'am to proceed with today's session. Thank you. Come on, audience, at least cheer up for our panelists. They've come all the way for us.
We're just going to have a freewheeling conversation, I think. Yeah. Everyone here is familiar with the Mahabharata, right? Is there anyone who's not familiar with the Mahabharata? No? Okay. Let's get started then.
Good morning, esteemed audience. I want to start the session by putting a question to Meenakshi. Meenakshi, you have already been... Hello. Meenakshi, you have already been a prolific writer, and it's quite astonishing that you have already written 7 books. That's absolutely astonishing at such a young age. And the last 2 of those books are on the Mahabharata theme. On Mahabharata girls, I think one on Satyavati and the other on Amba. My question is that these 2 characters are nevertheless important, and almost they left a decisive impact on the future courses of events, but they are not much celebrated characters. So my question is, what made you choose these 2 characters? Do you feel that the epic authors were not somewhat fair on these women, or in generally all epics are not fair on women? Mythological epics I am talking about.
Actually, this question has come up quite a lot recently, considering what's been happening in Indian politics and Indian history. With the Me Too movement happening, with Sabarimala happening, people have been talking more and more about how we look at the epics in modern day, and especially why the women are so sidelined, which is why I decided to go for it. I've always been, much like yourself, I've been inspired by the Mahabharata when I was a kid. I read all the Amar Chitra Katha versions and you know...
For me also, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really fascinating story, and I think as Indian novelists, we can't resist, taking it and like messing it around and making it our own. And as I was reading it, I realized that while I had seen some narratives about Draupadi and some narratives about Kunti maybe, the other women seem to be quite sidelined. Like, even though Satyavati is the matriarch of the Kuru clan, it's because of her that everything happens. And she's not even like blood related to anyone, but even it's because of her that everything happens, and there's not much out there about her. Similarly with Amba. who kills herself and is reborn as the first trans man in any epic, Shikandi. Now Shikandi is having a moment right now because of the trans bills and the 377 and the news around that. But when I was writing about Amba, all I could find was the fact that they were abducted and she killed herself and she's reborn. It's like Amba doesn't exist except to be reborn as a warrior. Who was the girl Amba who came before that? What would make a young girl kill herself? In the case of Satyavati, what would make a young girl want to marry a king that much older than herself? So these are all questions that I asked, and because I've written about women before, I really love writing about women. I like writing about the inner spaces of women and their drama, and usually they're in an urban setting. And I don't think your concerns in 1500 BC are so different from your concerns in 2018 AD. So I think women are still thinking about, what am I doing? Where am I going? What is my future? And so I took those questions and I put them in an epic background and I tried to answer them.
Yes, can't agree with you more. Quite surprisingly, all the mythological epics, you'll find one thing, that the women are quintessentially at the eye of the storm. They are the cynosure of the tragedy, the cynosure of the tension. But they are strangely forgotten because no one cared to tell her sides. The epic writers, they didn't care to put across their inward feelings. So it's a very but I think the women got a raw deal. Women characters got a raw deal as far as not our epics, in Greek epics also. If we just extend our horizon, the characters like Cassandra, Hecuba, Helen.
Because it's because men write them down.
Yes, it's maybe, but perhaps that invisible glass ceiling existed that time also, and all their lives they tried to break that open, but they couldn't actually, and it was sort of, they didn't openly revolt the women, but actually it's a simmering resentment that brought down the house. At least as far as Ramayana and Mahabharata are concerned, the basic the devastation is caused by the wrath of women. Yeah, actually, and I think that the basic the failure of the mythological men were that they couldn't treat their women well. That's yeah.
That actually brings me to Yudhishthira, topic of your book. You are saying that the Mahabharata was caused by the wrath of a woman. I think it was actually caused by Yudhishthira gambling away everything. Don't you think?
Exactly. That's one thing. In fact, I chose to write on Yudhishthira just because I was so curious that how such a person could be made a hero of. This person, he played a gamble with his legitimate wife on Voyager and lost her. And not only that, further on, and we don't know whether he was much repentant about that. We don't find whether he regretted much. But the thing is that, and he lied to his guru to win a war. So how can this man be unfallen? How can this man ascend a heaven in a mortal frame? So it was sort of a strange mystery to me. And from that, I chose to write on him. And what I feel after studying on Yudhishthira and in the process of writing, that perhaps I myself can identify I can identify myself most with Yudhishthira, because Yudhishthira was a person who can be held as a champion of most ordinary man, most flawed man, who has a motley mixture of good and bad. I think it was more of a narrative technique to make the first half of the story, to make the protagonist look very loser type of person, very unsmart. He was confused, and in the second part, that man is turning around. So it's a maybe a narrative technique. But what I think is that Yudhishthira was not born with any particular skill. He was not as strong as Bhima, he was not as skilled as Arjuna, he was not as handsome as Nakula, he was not as sharp as Sahadeva. Then what did he have? He didn't have any particular virtue to cash in on his life. Cannot such persons have any chance in their lives? Persons like us, who are not born with any particular virtues or qualities. Are we destined to lose?
He's not very likable.
He's
not very likable. Neurotic.
Yes. Yes, you please go on with your version of Yudhishthira. I want to hear that from you.
I think that he just, because maybe because he's jealous of his other brothers, not Nakul and Sahadev so much, no one cares about Nakul and Sahadev, but Arjun and Bhim are these strong, champion, handsome people, and Yudhishthira just basically gets to do everything because he's the eldest. I mean, let's not forget that when Draupadi was won in the Swayamvar, and Kunti said, share what you've got, Yudhishthira is the one who said, oh yes, my mother said we have to share, so we have to share. You know, it was all because of him that whole 5 marriages thing happened.
He was interested to marry her.
That's what I think. And he's the only Pandav who didn't marry anyone else. He's the only one who stayed true to Draupadi, actually, as it were.
Hello.
Is your mic not working properly?
I think it's fine.
This one, in front of us. Can you guys hear him?
Yeah. Then the mystery remains. Why did Vyasdeva choose to make him the hero, make him stand apart? I think we should have a commentary on the theme of mortality in the Mahabharata. If you have a slightly layered study of the Mahabharata, I think slightly layered, I think it may be a sarcastic thing that he finally didn't fall. I can explain it a little further. In the last journey, Draupadi fell, and Bhima asked Yudhishthira. We all know. I just reiterating just to keep the continuity. And Bhima asked him. It was the most stupid question in the entire Mahabharata. Brother, why did Draupadi fall? And back came the most brutal answer. She fell because she loved Arjuna more. Now, can this be a sin? Arjuna was her most legitimate husband. She loved him. And so what's the sin about it? And the person who gambled away his wife, who just told his guru a lie to win a war, to win a piece of land, and he's completing his journey and ascending heaven in mortal frame. So what was in the mind of Vyasdeva, on the author? My very personal perception is that perhaps Vyasdeva wants us to believe that mortality is not a bad thing. Draupadi fell, it was not her punishment. It was a good end of a beautiful thing called life. And she fell, it was actually a bliss. It was not a punishment. Yudhishthira completed his journey, it may not be that desirable. And in support of my claim, I think we can remember another incident. The most terrible curse of the Mahabharata was given to Ashwatthama. And what was that curse? Krishna told him that you did such a grievous, heinous crime, so I punish you. I snatch death from your life, and you'll get to understand how pathetic your life becomes. I think that's a very suave, very sharp commentary, very little cryptic message that if there is no death, the life is meaningless. So Draupadi fell, the other Pandavas fell because they lived their life beautifully. Yudhishthira didn't fall because it was actually his cryptic punishment, a covered, a hidden punishment that was, which was glorified by the author for some other purposes, for spiritual needs maybe. But for us, it was not the most desirable thing on earth to complete one journey, not to die. So I felt that way. So the Unfallen Pandava, the name of my book, the Unfallen word is a little sarcastic here.
So I don't think you like Yudhishthira very much either.
Actually, I have to do a lot of answering to this question. People think that I am fond of Yudhishthira, but Yudhishthira is not my most favorite person. My most favorite character is Karna. And my most favorite, and another very favorite character is, you may laugh, Ghatotkacha.
I like it. He's a good character.
If you see him in a little post-colonial angle, you'll find the greatness of his character, and even more his mother.
Hidimba is actually one person I want to write one of my girls in the
Oh, really?
I like the idea of her sitting in the forest and falling in love and things like that. I'm wondering who my favorite character is. Maybe Draupadi. I guess it's really typical to say Draupadi, but she really is. She's quite a woman with many shades of grey. I think she would be really fascinating to write about.
My personal request to you, Meenakshi, if you choose to write any woman, please choose to write on Kunti. I wanted, because but I chose not to write on Kunti, because for that I had to get into the skin of that character, which is quite difficult for me.
Kunti is a very interesting
Kunti
case.
is the most mysterious person.
Yeah, because she's the first unwed mother, I think, of an epic. Because you think about how progressive Hindu mythology was back in the day. I mean, it's quite a shame what's happened to the country now, but then back in the day, it was like it embraced so many things. Even if you look at the Puranas. If you remember, Vishnu took on a female form, Mohini, and Mohini regularly was seduced by Shiva, who knew that this was Vishnu as a woman, and yet it didn't stop them from having children and having affairs all over the place. So even when you were talking about mortality, I think with ancient Hindu philosophy, death and life were very linked. When I was talking about Amba and Shikandi right there, everyone's familiar with the story of Amba and Shikandi. Basically, she kills herself, becomes a warrior, so she can come back and kill Bhishma, who is another character I don't like at all, by the way. Yeah.
You don't like him?
No. He's just too full of himself. But even then, the idea is that death is not an ending. Death is a beginning to a new way of me living my life.
That's what I wanted to convey.
Yeah. So with all of this, it's interesting to think how the ancients were letting people prepare for their own deaths by saying, okay, this is not the end of the journey. And if you think about Greek mythology, for example, which I think is very similar to Indian mythology.
Exactly thinking about it. It's sort of the telepathy that
there's this whole myth of Persephone, which is actually my favorite myth. I don't know how many of you know it. She's stolen away by Hades, who is the god of the underworld. And she goes there and she's not supposed to eat anything, but she eats 6 pomegranate grains. And Hades tells her, since you've eaten the 6 pomegranate grains, you have to stay in the underworld for 6 months, which is what the Greeks describe as winter. Winter is when the goddess of spring has been taken away from us. So similarly, I think in ancient times, death and life were facts of life. We weren't afraid of it. It was something that happened to all of us, and in the end we went to a happy party hall and hung out with all the people who died before us.
You reminded me a story from Iliad, Greek mythology, where Achilles went to just beat the very reluctant warrior, because Agamemnon wanted him to be on his side, but he actually didn't like Agamemnon and he didn't want, but he went just for his own glory. But there he fell in love with a woman called Briseis, and Briseis was a god worshipper. Briseis cursed him. He said that you are good, you are a brute, you kill people, you'll never get the mercy of gods. Achilles was a very arrogant person. He said that if I don't get the mercy of your gods will not get my mercy. Because I am not envious of your gods, but your gods are envious of me. Do you know why? Briseis asked him, why? Well, because your gods don't know the sweetness of mortality. The gods don't know how beautiful our life is because we are mortal. Every single moment we live can be our very last. And that's why our life is so fascinating, so charming. But the gods don't have that glorious uncertainty in their lives. They will live on and live on and live on. They don't know what bloody thing life is all about.
Even in Hindu mythology, I think there's a lot of asuras who ask for the boon of eternal life. I won't be destroyed. And something bad always happens to them.
Exactly. That's true. And in the most of the cases, the boon were not granted to them. But even if that was, there are some riders who are there.
There's like a loophole somewhere.
There, just to save the things from.
Be very careful when you sign a contract with the Hindu gods.
Don't give them almighty, all power, and they'll be absolutely desperate and go out of hand. Manish, how do you perceive that the difference of portrayals in male and female characters in our epics in general?
So I've been doing quite a bit of research around the thing, and research meant that I read some retellings. I was Yajnaseni by Oriya writer Pratibha Ray. I read Chitra Banerjee's. Of course, I can only read in translation because I'm pretty much monolingual when it comes to my life. And then I read Iravati Karve's Yuganta. And and the Bhima one, what's it called?
Second Pandava.
What's it called? The Malayalam book. Anyway, so in reading all of this, I saw that definitely when you put women in center stage, some things are more emphasized. Your relationships are more emphasized. So maybe you'd be like, maybe the original story you read, for example, about Kunti, since we were just talking about her, is that she had a son with the sun god and set it adrift. However, a female retelling of this would go into the whys and the wherefores and the how this happened. And why would Kunti, an unmarried woman, choose to call down a male god when she knew what was going to happen to her? In the epics, the version of Ramayana I read, it's written off as a mistake. She didn't know what was going to happen. But I find it hard to believe that Kunti didn't know what was going to happen. I think she would have been explained what that mantra did before, because she called down a god.
Yes, actually, it's generally a section of revisionist novelists that believe that the gods were just a reuse, just a cover. There are some different people. Yeah, for instance, it was Durvasa who actually fathered Karna, perhaps. Durvasa, because why would have he given such a dangerous boon to a girl who was not even adult?
I've heard that as well. Because apparently in those days, the guest is God philosophy was happening. I was reading this, I do this column for First Post called Mythology for the Millennial, where I take mythology and I redo it as a contemporary sort of tongue-in-cheek take on what it was. And recently I did a column about Anasuya, who is the wife of a sage. And because she was so beautiful and so chaste, Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva all wanted to break that chastity vow a little bit. So they went to her and said, can you give us food? And she said, okay, I'll give you food. They're like, since we're the guests, you have to serve us food in the nude. So because she was such a magical lady, she turned them all into little babies. And that was the twist of this story. But I'm saying that in those days when a guest, especially a powerful Brahmin, asked you for something, you had to give it to them. And I feel that Kunti was offered to Durvasa as part of the honor of the house. He said, I would like to sleep with your virgin daughter. And she was offered.
Keep in mind that who offered her was not her biological father, he was adoptive father.
He was adoptive father,
yeah. So that gave a very secret grudge against in her mind against her. The first grudge, the first tragedy in her life was that when her father was Shurasen, I think the Vrishni king, she gave her not adoption, but her brother was Vasudeva, Krishna's father. Actually, Kunti was Krishna's aunt. Yeah. But he didn't give away Vasudeva. He gave away Kunti, the daughter, the girl child, because Kunti was his good friend and he didn't have any issue. So that was her first grudge. That why her father chose her to be given on adoption, not her brother. The second grudge was, why was she offered to Durvasa at such a tender age? Just to get some benefit out of him. Yes. Third grudge was that why her husband Pandu, who turned out to be not competent enough, he sent her to different men, and all her sons were born by different fathers. That's a terrible thing. You can imagine in any of our contemporary literature what Vasudeva write. And perhaps it was the beginning of a polyandrous society. And sometimes that makes us doubt whether she intentionally wanted Draupadi to get married to her 5 sons.
Well, she and Draupadi actually had a lot in common. Because Draupadi was also adopted. In fact, while you were talking about adoption, I was thinking that in the myths, except for Karna, who was a mistake, all the adoptive people have been daughters. Sita, Draupadi, Kunti, I'm sure Satyavati, they've all been girls who have been fostered by the outside. I guess people just didn't give up sons.
Yes, that's a good point. You were talking about the grudges of women. You consider the grudge of Satyavati. Satyavati was actually a Kuru princess. Her father was the Chedi king, Vasu, and And Satyavati and her twin brother was his illegitimate children. Once again, he kept the son, whose name was Matsya, and he will be the king, he will found the Viratnagar, where the Pandavas would live. And he gave Satyavati an adoption. To whom? To a fisherman. So that's a terrible lot she suffered. She had to re-enter his own family by way of a maneuvered marriage.
Exactly. Even, I mean, at least all the others were brought up by royalty. I mean, Sita, I think, was just found in a field somewhere. Draupadi, they say, was emerged from a fire, which I have interpreted as a house burned down and they found a baby in it. I was going to...
That's a very good point.
I was actually going to say something about your Kunti thing, how she had to sleep with the other men. So, at some point, Madhuri asked her, can you do the boon again, and we'll both enjoy ourselves with this boon. And in the Mahabharata itself, I'm paraphrasing, Kunti basically calls her a slut. She's like, listen, we've had enough kids. I don't think either of us needs to have any more children. For after a point, it's not about duty anymore, it's about pleasure. And a woman should not sleep with another man when she's already married just for pleasure. Just for... You think about how angry Kunti must have been at this point.
Yes, that we all talk about Draupadi's anger, but we never, we are not much vocal, and we are not much, Kunti was much like an unheralded heroine, And if you consider very closely, all the important events of the Mahabharata was Kunti behind the curtain. That you just see, she invisibly or perhaps unwittingly controls the forces of events. Unwittingly, I'll say unwittingly, she managed to keep a low profile all through. But she unwittingly became the center of the tragedy. Men caused behind the tragedies. And the first cause was Karna. I don't think if Duryodhana wouldn't have Karna as his friend, he would have gone that extreme. Because he was intelligent enough to believe that by Bhishma and Dronacharya, he will not be able to win the battle. So it was Kunti's mistake, or Kunti's illegitimate child, that gave him the greatest weapon to the biggest enemy of her official sons.
So maybe it was her genes that made all her sons amazing warriors. Because that's the only thing they had in common, isn't it?
It's a strange, ironical situation that the ancient author has put into his writing. There's absolutely, I think only any Bollywood scriptwriter would have been felt jealous of this.
Actually, women's rage is something that I kept coming back to when I was writing my Girls of the Mahabharata series, because they all have so much to be angry about. Even when I started looking at Amba, who is not a character who comes up very often, I think this woman must have been so mad that she actually kills herself so that she can be reborn as someone who can take revenge.
Can you rationalize this reborn part? As I sometimes suspect whether Shikandi was Amba's child. Maybe her secret paramour was Parashurama. Because I am saying this because Parashurama was Bhishma's guru, and they had a very strict and very deep Guru and Shishya bonding. Why Parashurama will take such a firm stand for Amba? Because Parashurama was never interested in women generally, as we say. And he took such a firm stand that he tried to kill Bhishma. And then they fought a terrible war which Parashurama lost.
That's right, think of that.
Yeah. So maybe I think that there's the only reason that could have driven him that crazy.
Fictionally, I've kept it kind of vague. So there's two parts of the story, and the second part, she may or may not be a reincarnation. It's kind of, people, I figured that your baby story is really cool, but I figured that that in those days, reincarnations were so close to the surface that even if you were not reborn, like say I was Meenakshi, and people kept telling me, oh, in your last life you used to be so and so. So I may not believe it, but because everybody around me believes it so strongly, I start to feel a little bit like, okay, maybe it is my destiny to go and kill Bhishma. Even if I personally have no motivation to kill someone. It's because I've been told so often.
That's a very interesting point. You set me thinking about this Amma and this this reincarnation drama that perhaps covered a greater secret.
So why did you pick the Mahabharata?
Yes, that's a tricky question to answer. You want to ask me whether I picked up Mahabharata or why I chose to write on Mahabharata?
Why did you just read about it?
Just to write on Mahabharata. There is actually I chose to write on the Mahabharata because I never consciously wanted to be a writer. And I don't know whether I have at all become a writer till now as yet. But I started writing this book just to write the last chapter. I think that's the and unless I actually wanted to write the last chapter of this. There's this the scene of the Mahaprasthan. To me, and I want to thank you for asking this question because this gives me an opportunity to to my opinions and feelings. Just imagine the last situation, the last journey. They have relinquished their conquered kingdom. They have relinquished their worldly ties. The 5 brothers and their wife, they are going on an endless journey, and no one knows what will befall them. Yudhishthira, one by one they are falling, and Yudhishthira is, Bhima keeps on asking him questions, why he fell, why she fell, and he continues giving him answers. I found, personally speaking, I found there's a strange existential conflict that has been depicted in this scene. When Yudhishthira represented, I think this scene, it bears all representative elements of Indian mythology in general. That means it seems like a capsule of the mood things of Indian mythology. This existential crisis of human beings. 2 sides, they are saying. Yudhishthira representing the prototype, that very typecast essence of individuality. While the Pandavas, the brothers, and obviously Draupadi are representing the actual individualism. Yudhishthira's individualism is imposed. It's artificial. He has been taught from the beginning that you have to be like this. One good man has to be like this. One good king has to be like this. One good kshatriya has to be like this. And he tried to maintain this all along. But his brothers were less orthodox. His wife was even less so. They represented the individuality of the personal choices. They were unashamed about their love. They were unashamed their hunger for food. They are unashamed about their present for their skills in warfare. They are unashamed to just portray their good looks like Anakula. They were unrepentant about brandishing their intelligence. So they represent the various frailties of human nature, which Yudhishthira tried to conceal all his life. But he failed, and he made an even greater blunder in trying to do so. So in this last journey, it brought me to a very acute philosophical destination. And there was also, and everything is happening under the canopy of a spirituality, when life and death are meeting at the twilight of life. One is trying to ascend, go across, go beyond life to embrace death. So there is a very light and shade between, very philosophical thing is that, and I think the points of Indian philosophy, it can be seen as a metaphor for the Indian general Indian mythology
in many ways,
general.
Yudhishthira actually reminds me of Ram.
I'm just coming to that. So I actually wanted to write on this chapter. But how can I reach that chapter unless I write the previous ones? So if you ask me why did I have to write this book, just for the sake of reaching the last chapter, I had to write the rest chapters to reach there. And that's why the last chapter I named it the unbeaten path. But then I renamed it as the last companion. The last companion because it is once again a metaphor. That, yes, exactly. Thank you. And whether, it's not important for me whether Yudhishthira ascended heaven or not in his mortal frame. What is important for him that he didn't agree to leave his dog behind. Because that was his last companion. And he said that his Yudhishthira's actual greatness was manifested in this action. So whether I am getting heaven or not, I don't care. The only thing I care in this life is that, or even in my death, is that I am not going to leave this companion. Which is the metaphor of dharma. Dharma is not in the sense of religion, but in the sense of the natural, the inherent concept of truth, justice. That's why it's the final companion. There's a last companion. And just for writing this chapter, I had to write the
Well, I know J.K. Rowling works the same way. She wrote the
I
final
didn't know
chapter.
that.
She wrote the final chapter of Harry Potter first, and then worked her way towards the end of the book.
Come again?
J.K. Rowling always knew how Harry Potter was going to end. So
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about duty. I feel like that is also very much a part of it. In fact, I wanted to address the issue of, obviously, the Mahabharata is a Kshatriya narrative, which I think the Brahmins got hold of later and tweaked it a bit so that the Brahmins always came in as a kind of way to propel the story forward. The sages came in, they cursed you, and because of the sages' curse, the story got more exciting or more interesting. Do you think that the Mahabharata is terribly casteist though?
Actually, I don't want to just make any comments on that. I'll have to carry on this particular point. I'll ask you to carry on.
I should comment first. Come on, that's not fair. I asked you the question.
Okay. It's difficult, it's open to interpretations, because in Mahabharata, I don't think Mahabharata is casteist, because it's, at least one scene in Mahabharata, it's said that Yudhishthira was confronted by, a python, I think, in Vanavas Pardo, and python was none other than the accursed king Nahush, the father of Jayati. Yeah. So he was given a curse because he once kicked Rishi Agastya. Nahusha, and he cursed him that he will become a python until and unless one Kuru prince will rescue you from your curse, giving the questions to your answers. So in that session in the Mahabharata, I'll say in very brief, because he just asked some questions about castes. So Yudhishthira's reply in gist was that no castes are pure, and it's not Brahmins are not born. Brahmins are not born as Brahmins. We have to become a Brahmin by works, and similarly for Shudras also.
Yes, I always like that about Yudhishthira.
Yes.
But I'm thinking about how Karna was also denied becoming a king because of his caste. He was a Sutta, and all his life, his half-brothers, his unknown half-brothers, referred to him as Sutta-Putta, I think, through the entire thing.
Yes,
or
yes.
Arjun and Krishna burning down that forest, which was full of, the snakes who represented tribals at that point. So, and Eklavya, who had to come. There's a lot that is problematic, I think. I think that as retailers, it's also our duty to bring out that as well, not just the glory days of all these wars.
Absolutely right. I want to thank you because you raised the issue of the burning of Khandava. If you just see it, and one snake was there, Ashwasena, who was saved from that carnage, and he later tried to take revenge on the Pandavas, and he took shelter in Karna's arrow, and he just tried to attack Arjuna, strike Arjuna through that arrow. And Ashwasena has been painted as a villain, as a scheming villain in this in the AP. But my question is, what wrong did he do? If you see it in a post-colonial angle, with a post-colonial approach and thing. It was their place. They used to live there with all the with peace, and they spent their childhood there. It was that forest was their place, and his mother was there, his father was there, his brothers were there, his friends were there, and that was mercilessly burned, just to to appease the god. So who gave the right to the Pandavas? And another thing I want to just tell you is in this issue, when the palace of Lak was being burned at Varanagati, this Kunti and 5 brothers, they just gave the slip and they set the palace on fire. At that time, 5 tribal women, one tribal women and 5 sons, they were invited to the palace, and they just took too much meal, sumptuous meal, and they slept there, and they got burned in the carnage, and their charred bones, burnt bones, were mistaken as the Pandavas and Kunti.
And I don't think anyone
was much repentant,
No one brings it up afterwards. It's like, oh, there are conveniently 5 bodies in there.
Similarly, for Ghatotkacha's case, you see, Ghatotkacha was conveniently forgotten. Ghatotkacha knew that he will never become the king, but he was conscripted into the war just to save Arjuna. In this issue, I think I want to tell you one thing. Sometimes I think that it's a sort of a greatest rod, that's Ghatotkacha, and this is the tribal things about. And even greater rod was received by his mother, Hirimba, that you just told a little earlier.
Because he just impregnated her and left.
Yes.
But in the way of soldiers everywhere, I guess.
Just think about her greatness. She never knew that she always knew that she is not going to be the queen. She is not going to be the royal. She is going to be a part of the royalty. She loved someone. He gave him a son, and then conveniently left her for good. And only resurfaced in her life just to take some help, not to give some help. So it's a very strange thing, ethically speaking.
When you start diving into it, there's so much going on. Even in the Ramayana, if you take the case of Shurpanakha, I think,
yes.
She's dealt with very badly as a woman who really just put out what she wanted. All she's like is, I am here, you are here, let's do it, I guess. Yeah. But for that she is punished so severely. I think that it indicates also the way that people then were thinking about others.
Actually, our topic is mythology revisited. I think it's used in a slightly figurative sense. But can you think of it as a more literal meaning? Because actually, what I want to say is that I want to share put across a very personal feeling. I think the events in the Mahabharata, at least, sometimes of a grim, ominous prophecy. It seems like me, because I find strange similarity between Battle of Kurukshetra and Second World War. Hitler resembles Duryodhana. Shokuni resembles Mussolini to me. And Stalin's Russia represents much like Arjuna. Roosevelt maybe like Krishna.
I actually don't think Duryodhana was as bad as Hitler.
No, I'm not saying it bad. I'm just about the incident, similarities. And the most striking similarity I find between Ashwatthama and Japan. And Japan. Japan's role and Ashwatthama's role, you just remember. Ashwatthama attacked his enemy's camp in the depth of the night. Like Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in the night. Then both Ashwatthama and Japan were associated with the most devastating weapons. And the similarity doesn't end there. The Ashwatthama's weapon killed many unborn babies, including Parikshit, who was later resurrected by Krishna. And similarly, we know that when the atom bomb blasted at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the next unborn progeny was deformed and perished. So I think it's maybe is there any connect or that? Actually, I want to raise this question because does the similarity end there? Because in the Mahabharata it is said that then Dharmarajya was established. But in reality, after World War, have we got a world as perfect as that? So my question is that if the wars are so similar, why the later situations are not so similar? That means, should we have to take that Dharmarajya concept with a pinch of salt? Or is it just a utopia? Cannot it happen in reality? Cannot it happen in an ideal world in the reality?
Actually, more than World War II, what the Mahabharata reminds me of is the War of the Roses that happened in England right before the Tudor time, because that was also a cousins' war. And at that time, many people believed very religiously that their side was the Dharmaraja side and the other side was the evil Duryodhan side. But I think Duryodhan was actually a lot like Yudhishthira. He was also an eldest brother. He was also envious. Maybe he felt that as the eldest cousin even, he had more right to the kingdom than Yudhishthira did. And I think his main feeling was his envy, of course. But does that make him a bad guy? Or is it just
I completely agree with you on this count. I completely agree. And in the Mahabharata also it's written that there was a strange thing happened with him. Duryodhana was so unlucky because his mother became pregnant before Yudhishthira's mother. But her pregnancy period was unusually long, for 2 years. I don't know how that can be rationally defined. But that way he is technically elder than Yudhishthira. But his fortune was so bad, the destiny was so bad on him.
There are a few retailers that call him Suyodhan. There are a few retailers that call him Suyodhan and not Duryodhan.
Yeah.
And he's meant to be a pretty good king.
Yes.
And he's a good friend.
Yes, he is a good friend. And he is the one thing, he's one person who rose above the various strata of society. He didn't care whether he's Sutta, he was very fond of Ekalabha also.
I'm not saying he was perfect. What he did to Draupadi was quite shocking. He basically harassed her. And
that's one thing that cannot be explained. That should not be, that can never be defended. Let alone defend, that cannot be, that cannot fit into his character otherwise.
But considering the role of women then, as property, as chattel, I guess, again, is it that different from Yudhishthira saying, let this woman be shared among all 5 of us?
I don't think so, it's much different. Huh?
Exactly. Anyway, on that note, should we open up the floor to questions now? Anyone have any questions?
Hello, I am Major Thomas. It is 2 minutes, just an observation about Shurpanakha. So I have written a poem about Shurpanakha on the very same language I will read in the afternoon in my session from 3:30 to 5. I very much, ask the Lord who knows everything. Ram is Paramatma, so he should be knowing what he's doing. So this kind of writing on the epics. So many of reinterpretation of the epics happening in Buddhist Latin languages, in all the languages of India and in English now. But such, very poignant depictions of characters.
Again, I think Shurpanakha existed just to put the story forward in a way.
But this is what I am questioning in life.
This is a question to both of you. See, while discussing Mahabharata, Mallar, you on several occasions, you treat events as metaphors or symbolic of certain things. But when you talk about the pregnancy being of 2 years, you are bewildered and you are intrigued. Why? Again, maybe it was of some symbolic, it was a symbolic event in the Mahabharata. The other thing which has always mystified me, although I have not read the epics in great detail, is the treatment that was given to Sita by Ram when her chastity was brought into question by that Dhobi. I would like to know what are your views or what are your interpretations on that event in Ramayana.
Thank you so much, respected sir, for your question. I'm trying to reply it with my limited knowledge. Sir, actually, Rama's case, I think, much similar to Yudhishthira's. Just as I mentioned, that Yudhishthira and Rama represented that existential, that side of existentialism, where that a prototype concept of goodness was thrust upon them. They were not allowed to live their lives in their own terms. They were conscripted into I won't say fake notion of dharma or justice, but they were initiated into some orthodox mode of dharma that often clouded their own humanity. I don't believe that they themselves are not repentant. Not for a single moment I want to say that Lord Rama was very happy to send Sita away. But he couldn't become resolute enough to rise rise above the things that were taught up to him. I think for Yudhishthira also, sir. Exactly, sir. Sir, that's a strange conflict in Dharma, sir.
I have an explanation for Yudhishthira's birth, for Duryodhana's birth. I think that she had a series of miscarriages, but she still counted herself as pregnant before Kunti. That's my theory. Either that or a tumor.
Hello, ma'am. My question is, what is the connect between LGBT community and the Shikhandi? Do you think any connect if you have done that?
I definitely think so, because as I was talking about earlier, I do think that the Hindu myths were far more accepting of these things than we are in present day. And Shrikanti's case is actually quite remarkable because he was born a woman, and yet his entire family believed that he was a man so much that they even got him married to a woman. And on that, then it was discovered, and I'm not going to spoil the book, I mean, it's all in there. But I think that the lines, while a potter could not become a prince, I think the lines between sexuality and gender were much more fluid than they are today.
Thank you.
So now my question is, you are comparing Yudhishthira with Duryodhana. So what is the concept of your good and evil? And my first question is that as far my knowledge of Mahabharata, and we all know that Mahadev cursed Draupadi, that you will have to marry with 5 people. So when Yudhishthira decided to marry Draupadi, so was he a wrong judge? And what is your interpretation about Yudhishthira?
Actually, you asked, one part of your question was that Mahadeva cursed Draupadi to have 5 husbands. This thing has to be understood in equal perspective. You'll find one thing, in both the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, all evil characters are getting boons from Shiva. Apparently evil characters, I am saying, without being judgmental. In the Ramayana, Ravana was a Shiva worshipper. In the Mahabharata, there is plenty, Shakuni, Jayadratha, Ashwatthama, Jarasandha, they are also Amba. They are all Shiva worshippers. So why is it so? Why do the evil characters get so much boons from Shiva. Not only evil characters. Why the evil incidents like Draupadi's marriage? It is a very dysfunctional marriage. That's true, and that's a very bizarre kind of marriage. One lady is getting married to 5 persons. So these things are happening from the Shiva is associated with these things. Why? Because we have to understand one thing. Because these literatures were actually Vaishnava literatures, and there is a very hidden conflict between Shaivism and Vaishnavism here. Because these Ramayana, the epic period is in the later Vedic period, where the Aryan culture was mixing with the indigenous culture, and Shiva was an indigenous god. Like in Harappa Mohenjo-daro, there was Pashupati, which is a precursor of Shiva's concept. So it's a very synthetic time, where the Shiva has been held quite in good esteem in the epics, but he was not given his due thing, because it was, I think, deliberately Shiva has been associated with some negative things, just to make Vishnu look superior, more superior. So this is one hindsight that I can give you, and for the first part of your question, I think you'll be better placed to answer. Yeah, I think she asked you that. Okay. No, Yudhishthira and Duryodhana, yes. I think they both are the same. The both parts of the same coin. Is there? Yes, there is no good versus evil, because what I personally believe, I want to thank you for this question, because it has touched a very personal chord with me. I think this planet has always had only one color. It was not green, not white, not blue, not orange or something like that. It always had one color, that is grey. You know, I from my own personal experience, I have written a book on Yudhishthira, and I am going to write another on every negative character, apparently negative character. When I was writing on Yudhishthira, I was finding that his character was apparently bright. He was a good person, so to say. It is generally believed. But in my writing, I am unable to digest many of his activities. So in my writing, he was not as bright as he was projected. He was becoming little dark, he was going towards darker side. Similarly, when I was writing on the dark character, I was finding that he was not as dark as it seemed. He was moving towards brighter side. Ultimately, both Yudhishthira and that person became grey. Almost similar. Different shades of grey, but grey. So if you compare Yudhishthira and Duryodhana, it's a very good question. I think both are grey characters.
For the first time in my life, I have heard that Yudhishthira is a bad person from you. Because from my childhood, that I have heard that he's a third Raja, he's the representative of good. That's why I have asked that question.
No, that's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, sir and madam. I'm Nandika Rohit, studying in class 10th from Royal Global School. While we have talked about women and how they have been angered, there's this question in my head regarding the fact that how Dronacharya asked Eklavya to cut off his right thumb as Guru Dakshina just because he wanted Arjuna to be the best archer in the world. What are your views on that?
If you ask my view, I will simply say that I am not holding a plea for Dronacharya, because that's one character I strongly dislike. But Dronacharya is the most relatable person, I think, in the epic, who, apart from his unquestionable mastery in archery and warfare, I didn't find anything greater in that particular character, Dronacharya. So I think he just gave such a raw deal to Ekalavya. I think it just befits his personality, and nothing more could have been expected from a person like him. He is a person who sold himself, which Parashurama never did. He was a greedy person. In my opinion, I may be very clear, but Dronacharya is a very greedy person in my eyes, and he was a very narrow person. He was very opportunist also. So I don't know whether I am being unfair on him. You can say, you can add anything if you want to like in this.
I think this incident is actually one of the ways that the Mahabharata is truly honest about society back then. You're meant to dislike the character, you're meant to say this is so unfair, because it's such an example of oppression. And doing that, it also reveals that this text itself is so layered and various on its villains and its goodness and its shades of grey. It's not meant to be read as a this is right and this is wrong. It's meant to be read as a this is what happened. It is, in many ways, I feel like the Mahabharata reflects more truly on society than the Ramayana does. I think that it has more to give the reader.
Thank you.
First, I must congratulate both of you for the knowledge that you've had, you've displayed about both the epics, of course more the Mahabharata. I just want you mentioned Ms. Reddy, as you were speaking, you talked about how, you talked about the role of women and so on. But don't these epics reflect society as it was then? And if modern research is to be believed, the Ramayana happened almost 9,000 years ago, and the Mahabharata maybe a few thousand years after that. So is it possible to look through those times through modern spectacles? That's one. The second I want to ask, since you both read a lot, obviously it was an oral tradition for many millennia. It was an oral tradition. Sorry? Yeah. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana were transmitted in the oral tradition for millennia, for thousands of years. And then it was written down, maybe they say, maybe in the 1st century, 2nd century BC. I'm not really sure, you probably know much more because you all have studied these epics. But do these different versions in different parts, say Kerala, your Madhavan seems to be from Kerala, but Reddy would be perhaps from Andhra Pradesh. And you, of course, read from the East Strategy, definitely. Did the Mahabharata, especially, have different versions in different parts of India? Bhagavad, for example. Bhagavad is supposed to have gone from Kamrupa. In your readings, do you think that it was actually possible at that time for this great battle to have been joined by kings from all over, from what we now know as India?
To answer the first part of your question about accuracy, it's quite hard to actually do a retelling of anything and avoid anachronism in the first place. Of course, I want my women to be feminist and strong and outspoken, but I also realized, as you said, it was not the role of women at that time to be empowered. They were used as tools to increase kingdoms or to bear sons, or because their pedigree was correct. What I can do in a retelling is shift the focus of the telling to the women. So even though their role may have not improved, at least we are seeing the world through their lens. As for the second part of your question, I was doing some historical research around the time, and a lot of people believe that it wasn't the Mahabharata, as they say. It was just a couple of tribes in that particular part of North India, in UP, parts of Jaipur and things like that, who battled with each other. It wasn't a mega scale thing. It was just warring chieftains, which makes it sound a lot smaller and dingier than it actually is. Anyone else?
Mr. Mallar, what is your perception about Ravana? How much respect does he derive from you?
Thank you, sir, for your question. Sir, I have great regards for Ravana, please. Because sir, I am from the land of Michael Madhusudan Datta, he wrote Meghnad Badh Kabbya, and that was the first, revisionist mythological retelling, I think. It was in early 18th century. Sir, I apart from just taking away someone else's wife, I think Ravana did nothing wrong. Sir. And sir, the most interesting thing is that he took her away, but he waited for her consent for the marriage. He never forced himself on her. So it's a strange complexity in Ravana's character. And if we have to just abide by what was written in the Mahabharata properly, he did all these things just to avenge his sister's humiliation. So I don't think, sir, he didn't do anything wrong. Apart from taking care, obviously, someone else's wife. What's your take?
In some versions of the Ramayana, an added text says that once he raped an Apsara, Ravan, and he was cursed, saying that if you ever try to rape someone again, your heads will fall apart. So that is one explanation for asking for consent. Also, another version I heard, sorry, I'm just taking away all your herodom from... but there's many different tellings of these things, which is why retellings are so important, I think. Another version I read was that Shurpanakha said, look at what's happened to me. He was like, oh, okay, I guess these things happen. And she said, by the way, have you checked out Ram's wife? She's really quite beautiful. She should be your wife. So he was persuaded to do that for, not really for very noble reasons. He was persuaded to do it out of lust, really.
Good afternoon, I'm Sabha from Don Bosco School. My question is slightly different. As Sir Thomas and Sir Jayanta had already asked, there may be different versions or interpretations of this epic. Mythology in itself is very sensitive, and revisiting is even more sensitive. So my question is, were you extra cautious or extra careful? Was it a bumpy ride, revisiting? That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, I think it's very true. You have to just maintain a very, it's like a tight rope walk between, because mythology is generally the most indigenous asset of a nation. And you mustn't play too smart with that. But there should be a limit of creative liberty that you can take. So I think it's really a bumpy ride, and it's a tight, thin rope walk. You have to, exactly, one thing you have to be very, I think one has to be very cautious about, exactly for what he is writing this. Because I told, for my case, I told before that I wrote the book just for reaching the last chapter, because for me it was very representative of the entire gamut of Indian mythology. So one has to be very honest and very clear, exactly for which purpose. Is he trying to put across any particular social message, or he's going to just conduct a coup, a social coup, or any national, to put across a message, I think, to prove a point. So he has to be very clear, and his writing should be according to that.
Not a question, but suggestion if you agree. Mr. Chatterjee and Mr. and Mrs. Madhavan, I don't agree with him that the word revisited should not be taken in its facial value. It is exactly a post-colonial term, along with negotiation, transaction. Revisiting is a post-colonial term, a theoretical term in post-colonial discourse. I belong to English department of Assam University, teaching post-colonial literature for the last 30 years. So when we revisit mythology, we must be aware of the recent theories. And you cannot straightaway reject either Yudhishthir or Duryodhan or Ram or Ravan, because these texts were written some 3000 years back against the contemporary epic socio-political cultural ethos. So we are to reappropriate it or revisit it and then see which portion of the epic is relevant to the contemporary discourse and which one is not. We should not draw any final conclusion in intellectual discourse. This is my suggestion.
Hello. I came in a bit late, so maybe you have already disclosed this to the audience. What fascinates me about both of you is your immense knowledge intense knowledge of our epics. And both of you are so young. I find it very fascinating how you got drawn into studying the epics and then writing about them, because normally this doesn't happen with young people of today.
Actually, we did briefly cover it. In my own case, it began with Amar Chitra Katha. And thanks to that, I just started reading more and more. In my 20s, I came across Ramesh Menon's excellent modern retelling of the Mahabharata. It's just 2-volume set in total modern language. And because previously my knowledge was all Amar Chitra Katha, thanks to Ramesh Menon version, I started digging a little bit more. I got more and more curious about the stories that I had been missing. And that just led to a project that I always wanted to do, but I only just started doing later in my career.
Hello. Sir, I also started my journey through Amar Chitra Katha, as a matter of fact, sir. So actually my grandfather actually initiated me to studying Mahabharata and mythology. But sir, actually but I used to take that, read that as childhood tales. They were very, very serious attention to them. But one day I can remember you mentioned about Iravati Karve's book, Yuganta, and that was I was in a very impressionable age at that time. It's 18, 19, I think I was just early 20s. So I read that book. I was reading very carefully, very casually. The name of the book is Yuganta. Yugante, I just stumbled upon one sentence. And that opened a strange, this world for me. And that strange, sentence was that during his last journey, when Bhima asked Yudhishthira, why did she fall? Why did Draupadi fall? So Yudhishthira said that she fell because she loved Arjuna more. Up to this I knew. But the following line was sort of an eye-opener for me. The next line was, and with that, Yudhishthira dared open a festering wound in his heart that he kept hidden for years to end. So it sensitized me, sir. So actually, I'm just from my memory, it was something like that. That when Yudhishthira announced that she loved Arjuna more, and that's why she fell. So after this, it was a storyline, we all knew. Then the writer writes, Iravati Karve wrote, something like that, so I cannot exactly remember. She wrote like that, and with this comment, Yudhishthira bared over this leg, a festering wound in his chest bare. That he nursed secretly for so many years. So I stumbled upon this sentence, and it sensitized me to some extent, sir.
Hello, ma'am. No, one question. Last question, please. If Rama abandoned the proud Sita, then there is a bad thing or bad thing issue. If Rama abandoned the proud Sita, then there is a bad thing or bad thing issue.
Thank you. Every human society possesses a mythology which is inherited, transmitted and diversified by literature. On that note, I would like to convey my gratitude to our guest speakers for sharing their knowledge and taking us on a mythological tour and portraying a total different perspective of mythological characters. Thank you so much, guests, for being such a sport and being... I would now like to wind up the session here and request all the guests to proceed for lunch. Post lunch, we have another session. I would request all the guests to join us post lunch in the same hall. Thank you.